The sun was setting over the quiet streets of Oakwood Heights as Sophia Jenkins drove her Navy sedan through the familiar neighborhood. After 12 hours at the FBI field office, all she wanted was to get home, kick off her shoes, and enjoy a quiet evening. The soft hum of jazz played through her speakers as she navigated the suburban streets she'd driven hundreds of times before. At 35, Sophia had spent the last 12 years building a respected career in the Bureau. She specialized in civil rights violations and public corruption cases. Her colleagues admired her sharp mind and calm demeanor, qualities that had helped her navigate the challenges of being a black woman in federal law enforcement. As she approached the four-way stop at Maple and Pine, Sophia came to a complete halt, checked all directions, and proceeded forward. In her rearview mirror, flashing blue lights suddenly appeared. She frowned, mentally reviewing her driving. She had definitely stopped completely, was under the speed limit, and her registration was current. Sophia pulled over, turned down her music, and reached for her license and registration from the glove compartment. Years of training kicked in. Keep hands visible, move slowly, stay calm. Though she carried her FBI credentials, Sophia preferred not to identify herself as an agent during routine traffic stops. Officer Richard Dawson watched the Navy sedan pull over. His lips curled into a slight smile as he noticed the driver was a black woman. Dawson had been with the Oakwood Heights Police Department for 8 years. To his superiors, he was a model officer with a high number of arrests. What they didn't know was how he achieved those numbers. Dawson approached the car with a hand resting on his holster, flashlight beam aimed directly at Sophia's face. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering with any greeting. "Good evening, officer," Sophia replied calmly, handing over her documents. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" "You ran that stop sign back there," Dawson said, his tone hostile. "I'm certain I came to a complete stop, sir," Sophia responded evenly. Dawson's face hardened. "Are you calling me a liar, ma'am?" "No, officer, I'm just confused about the reason for the stop." Dawson studied her license with narrowed eyes. He noticed her address was in the expensive part of town. It bothered him seeing these people living in nice neighborhoods. He handed back her license but kept her registration. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "May I ask why that's necessary?" Sophia kept her voice steady. The alarm bells were ringing in her head. "I smell marijuana coming from your car. Step out now." There was no marijuana. Sophia didn't even drink alcohol, but she recognized the tactic. As she carefully exited the car, Sophia noticed Dawson touch his body camera. The small red recording light went off. Her FBI training immediately registered the significance of this action. "Stand over there," Dawson ordered, pointing to the front of her car. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Sophia complied, watching as Dawson began searching her car without consent, methodically checking under seats and in compartments. His movements showed he'd done this many times before. When he emerged from the vehicle, Dawson's face wore a triumphant expression. Between his fingers, he held a small plastic bag containing what appeared to be drugs. Well, what do we have here?" he said loudly, as if performing for an audience. "Looks like you'll be coming with me tonight." Sophia's heart pounded, but her face remained composed. She knew with absolute certainty that the bag had not been in her car before Dawson's search. As he roughly handcuffed her, reading her rights in a mocking tone, one thought crystallized in her mind. This officer had no idea who he was really dealing with, or the storm that was about to break over his head. The ride to the police station felt longer than the actual 15 minutes it took. Sophia sat silently in the back of Officer Dawson's patrol car, her mind racing through protocols and procedures. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, deliberately fastened too tight. She watched Dawson through the divider, noting how he occasionally glanced at her in the rearview mirror with a satisfied smirk. "You people think you can get away with anything," Dawson muttered loudly enough for her to hear. "Driving around in nice cars, living in neighborhoods where you don't belong." Sophia remained silent. Each word he spoke was another piece of evidence. Though her instinct was to reveal her identity as an FBI agent, her training told her to wait. The more rope Officer Dawson had, the more thoroughly he would hang himself. At the station, Dawson paraded her through the front entrance, gripping her arm too hard as he led her to booking. Several officers looked up, some with curiosity, others with indifference. A young female officer frowned slightly at Dawson's rough handling, but quickly looked away when he caught her eye. Got another drug dealer off the streets, Dawson announced proudly to the booking sergeant, a heavy-set man with tired eyes. Found her with this. He dropped the small bag of what appeared to be cocaine on the desk. The sergeant glanced at the bag, then at Sophia's professional attire and calm demeanor. Something didn't add up, but he shrugged it off. Dawson had brought in dozens of arrests like this, and the paperwork always seemed to be in order. "Name?" the sergeant asked, fingers poised over his keyboard. "Sophia Jenkins," she replied evenly. "You get one phone call," the sergeant said after completing the booking information. Dawson led her to the phone, standing close enough to hear her conversation. Sophia dialed a number from memory. "This is Agent Jenkins," she said clearly. "I'm being detained at the Oakwood Heights police station. I need you to initiate Protocol 27B. Dawson's face transformed from smugness to confusion. "Agent?" he repeated. Sophia turned to him, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "Yes, Officer Dawson. Special Agent Sophia Jenkins, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The color drained from Dawson's face. He quickly tried to recover his composure. "She's lying," he told the sergeant, who had come over after overhearing. "Trying to scare us with some FBI nonsense." "My credentials are in a hidden compartment in my purse," Sophia said calmly. "And within the hour, this station will be receiving calls from my field office director and likely the U.S. Attorney's Office." The sergeant looked uncertainly between Sophia and Dawson. "Check her purse," he ordered another officer. While they waited, Dawson leaned close to Sophia, his voice a threatening whisper. "Nobody's going to believe you. It's your word against mine, and I got the evidence right there." He nodded toward the bag of drugs. "Evidence you planted," Sophia replied quietly, while your body camera was conveniently turned off. Dawson's eyes widened slightly, but he forced a laugh. "Prove it." The officer returned with Sophia's FBI credentials. The room fell silent as the sergeant examined them. "Uncuff her," the sergeant ordered, his voice tight with concern. "But," Dawson began to protest. "Now, Dawson." As the handcuffs came off, Sophia rubbed her wrists, noting the red marks that would soon bruise. "Evidence." "I want that bag placed in an evidence locker immediately," she instructed. "No one touches it except forensics personnel. It needs to be tested for fingerprints." The sergeant nodded quickly, suddenly eager to cooperate. Within 20 minutes, the station's atmosphere transformed. The captain emerged from his office, face grim after receiving calls from both the FBI director and the mayor. 2 FBI agents arrived, their expressions professional but their eyes cold as they approached Sophia. "Are you all right?" one asked quietly. "I'm fine," Sophia assured them, "and we have work to do." Across the room, Officer Dawson sat alone at a desk, frantically writing his report, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to construct a version of events that wouldn't end his career, or worse, land him in prison. He glanced up to find Sophia watching him, her gaze calm and certain. In that moment, Dawson realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, the FBI field office buzzed with activity. Assistant Director Marcus Wilson called an emergency meeting in the conference room. At 58, Wilson had seen it all in his 30 years with the Bureau, but the situation with Agent Jenkins had him particularly disturbed. As one of his best agents, Sophia had his complete trust. "What do we know so far?" Wilson asked the assembled team of 6 agents. Special Agent Carlos Rodriguez, Sophia's regular partner, pulled up a digital file on the large screen. "Officer Richard Dawson, 34 years old, 8 years with Oakwood Heights PD. On the surface, his record looks good. High arrest numbers, commendations for drug busts." "Too good," Sophia added, seated at the table with a cup of coffee. Despite the previous night's ordeal, she appeared composed in a fresh suit. Only the faint bruising on her wrists revealed what had happened. "His arrest rate for minorities is significantly higher than his colleagues. I pulled the data this morning." Wilson frowned. "How much higher?" 87% of his drug arrests are black or Hispanic individuals. In a city that's only 25% minority, Sophia explained. "That's way beyond statistical probability." Agent Lay, a forensic specialist, joined in. "We got the bag he claimed to find in your car. Initial testing shows no traces of your fingerprints on it, but we found partial prints that likely belong to Dawson. Full results will be back tomorrow." Wilson nodded grimly. "This might be bigger than one bad cop. I want a complete background check on Dawson. Social media, finances, everything." "Already on it," Rodriguez confirmed. "And I'm checking for any complaints filed against him that might have been buried." Sophia pulled out her notebook. "I made contact with 3 officers at the station who seemed uncomfortable with Dawson's behavior. One of them might talk to us." As the meeting continued, across town at the Oakwood Heights Police Department, Captain James Mercer was having a very different kind of meeting with Officer Dawson. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mercer shouted, his face red with anger. "You arrested a federal agent. The FBI has been calling all morning." Dawson sat stiffly in the chair across from Mercer's desk. "I had no idea who she was, sir. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Mercer slammed his hand on the desk. "Your job is to enforce the law, not break it. Agent Jenkins claims you planted evidence." "She's lying," Dawson insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Why would I do that?" Mercer leaned forward. "The FBI is pulling your arrest records as we speak. They're reviewing every case you've handled involving minorities. Internal Affairs wants to meet with you this afternoon." Dawson's confident facade began to crack. "This is ridiculous. It's a witch hunt." "Is it?" Mercer asked quietly. "Because Officer Chen told me your body camera was turned off during the search. That's against department policy." "Technical malfunction," Dawson mumbled. "And Officer Rivera says this isn't the first time she's noticed your camera being off during arrests of minority suspects." Dawson's eyes darted to the door, as if considering escape. "They're out to get me because I'm actually doing police work instead of being soft on crime." Back at the FBI office, Agent Rodriguez burst into Sophia's office, excitement on his face. "You need to see this," he said, placing his tablet in front of her. "We found Dawson's alternate social media accounts. He's been careful on his public profiles, but he has anonymous accounts where he's less restrained." Sophia scrolled through page after page of racist posts, her expression growing darker. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "There's more," Rodriguez confirmed. "We identified a private online group where some officers share tips on targeting minorities, altering evidence, and avoiding camera detection. Dawson is an active member." Sophia looked up, determination in her eyes. "Get a warrant for his personal devices and home, if he's been doing this systematically. We could be looking at dozens of false arrests," Rodriguez finished. Wilson appeared in the doorway. "The U.S. Attorney wants to meet with us in an hour. This case just became a priority investigation." Sophia nodded, gathering her files. What had started as a personal injustice was quickly revealing itself to be something far more sinister, a systemic problem that had potentially destroyed countless innocent lives. "Let's make sure this never happens again," she said quietly. 3 days after her arrest, Sophia sat in a conference room at the law offices of Grayson and Palmer. Her attorney, Diana Palmer, was one of the best civil rights lawyers in the state. The FBI had encouraged Sophia to pursue both criminal charges against Officer Dawson and a civil case against the Oakwood Heights Police Department. "The evidence we've gathered so far is compelling," Diana said, organizing documents across the polished table. Her gray suit matched her steel-colored hair, and her reputation for winning impossible cases preceded her. "But we need to anticipate how they'll try to defend Officer Dawson. They'll claim he had reasonable suspicion for the stop and search," Sophia replied, drawing from her years of FBI experience. "They'll say the drugs could have been in my car without my knowledge." Diana nodded. "Exactly, which is why we need more than just your word against his." Agent Rodriguez entered the room carrying a laptop and several evidence bags. "I think we just got exactly what we need," he announced with a grin. "Tell me something good, Carlos," Sophia said, sitting up straighter. "We found traffic cameras at the intersection where you stopped," Rodriguez explained, opening his laptop to show footage. "The angle is perfect. You can clearly see your car come to a complete stop for over 3 seconds." Diana leaned forward, eyes sharp. "So his reason for pulling you over was fabricated from the start." "That's not all," Rodriguez continued, excitement in his voice. "Remember that coffee shop on the corner? Their security camera captured part of the traffic stop. The angle isn't great, but you can see Dawson turn off his body camera before searching your car. Sophia felt a wave of vindication. What about the drugs? Forensics confirmed no fingerprints from you on the bag, but they found Dawson's partials. More importantly, they found traces of the same substance in his patrol car, in a hidden compartment under the driver's seat. Diana's expression was triumphant. This is excellent. What else have you discovered about Officer Dawson? Rodriguez pulled out a folder. His finances are interesting. Regular deposits of cash between $500 and $1,000 that don't match his paycheck schedule. And we've identified 3 previous complaints against him that were mysteriously dropped. Any witnesses willing to speak? Diana asked. Better than that, Rodriguez replied. We found a former arrestee, James Washington, who was charged with possession last year by Dawson. The charges were eventually dropped, but Washington lost his job and his apartment while fighting them. He's agreed to testify that Dawson planted evidence on him too. As they discussed strategy, across town in a small apartment, Officer Chen from the Oakwood Heights Police Department sat nervously across from FBI agent Lai. She had agreed to meet away from the station, terrified of being seen talking to the FBI. I can lose my job for this, Chen whispered, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched tea. We understand the risk you're taking, Agent Lai assured her, but this is about justice and protecting the public from corrupt officers. Chen nodded slowly. Dawson isn't the only one. There's a group of them. They target specific neighborhoods, specific types of people. We know about the online group, Lai confirmed. What we need is someone from inside the department to confirm what happens in person. They'd have meetings, Chen revealed, lowering her voice further. Not all of them, just the core group. 5 officers, including Dawson. They call themselves the Cleaners. They talk about keeping certain neighborhoods clean by any means necessary. Do you have proof of these meetings? Chen hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I recorded one. I was afraid no one would believe me without evidence. She pushed the phone across the table. They discuss quotas of arrests in minority neighborhoods, how to plant evidence without getting caught. They even joke about cases they've fixed. Agent Lai's face remained professional, but her eyes widened slightly at this unexpected breakthrough. Officer Chen, you may have just broken this case wide open. Back at Diana Palmer's office, Sophia's phone buzzed with a message from Lai. After reading it, she looked up at her attorney and partner with renewed determination. We got them, she said simply, and this is much bigger than just my case now. Diana nodded gravely. Then let's make sure we build an airtight case. Not just for you, but for everyone Dawson and his friends have victimized. The basement of the FBI field office hummed with activity as agents pored over evidence. 2 weeks had passed since Sophia's arrest, and what began as one corrupt officer had expanded into an investigation of the entire Oakwood Heights Police Department. Agent Rodriguez pinned another photo to the case board. Officer Richard Dawson shaking hands with Police Chief Walter Grant at a department awards ceremony last year. The more we dig, the worse it gets, Rodriguez said, stepping back to survey their work. Dawson didn't operate in a vacuum. Sophia nodded, studying the network they had mapped out. Red lines connected Dawson to 4 other officers in his immediate circle. The Cleaners, that Officer Chen had identified. Yellow lines stretched to supervisors who had dismissed complaints against them, and at the top, a question mark hovered next to Chief Grant's photo. Have we confirmed the chief's involvement? Sophia asked. Not directly, answered Agent Kim, their tech specialist. She tapped her keyboard, bringing up financial records on the large screen. But we found something interesting in the department's budget. There's a special discretionary fund that only Chief Grant can access. Over the past 3 years, approximately $50,000 has been distributed as performance bonuses to these 5 officers. Bonuses for what, exactly? Sophia asked, though she suspected the answer. The timing of the bonuses correlates with spikes in drug arrests in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, Kim explained. It's essentially a bounty system. The door opened as Assistant Director Wilson entered with U.S. Attorney Rachel Patel. Wilson's face was grim, but Patel looked determined. We've reviewed your evidence, Patel said without preamble. I'm prepared to move forward with charges against Dawson immediately for evidence tampering, false arrest, and civil rights violations. For the others, including Chief Grant, we need more concrete connections. What about the recordings from Officer Chen? Sophia asked. Helpful, but some were obtained without proper authorization. We need to tread carefully to ensure admissibility, Patel cautioned. Wilson turned to Sophia. There's another development. Internal Affairs at Oakwood Heights finally started their own investigation after pressure from the mayor. They've suspended Dawson pending their findings. He knows we're closing in, Rodriguez noted. He's been calling former arrestees, trying to pressure them not to cooperate. That's witness tampering, Patel said sharply. Get me proof, and I'll add it to the charges. As the meeting continued, across town, Officer Dawson sat in a dimly lit bar far from Oakwood Heights, nursing his third whiskey. Across from him sat Officer Stanley Briggs, one of his closest allies in the cleaners. This is bad, Rick, Briggs muttered, glancing nervously around the nearly empty bar. Chen's missing shifts, Martinez is avoiding everyone, and the chief isn't returning my calls. They're all cowards. Dawson spat, his words slightly slurred. We did what needed to be done. The city was going to hell before we started cleaning it up. The FBI has been interviewing everyone. They got your arrest records, body cam footage, everything. Dawson leaned forward. They've got nothing that'll stick. It's all circumstantial. As long as we all keep our stories straight. I'm not going down for this, Briggs interrupted, fear evident in his eyes. My pension is 2 years away. I got kids in college. Dawson's face hardened. Are you threatening me, Stan? Because I've still got that video from the Thompson arrest. You were a lot more hands-on than your report indicated. Briggs paled. That's not fair, Rick. You said we were all in this together. We are, as long as everyone keeps their mouth shut. Dawson drained his glass. The FBI agent was a fluke. Bad luck. But she's just one case out of hundreds. They can't possibly investigate every arrest we've made. Unknown to either officer, at a table across the room, an FBI agent in plain clothes adjusted his watch, which contained a recording device capturing every word of their conversation. Back at the field office, Sophia reviewed witness statements from people who claimed Dawson had planted evidence on them. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Traffic stops for minor or non-existent violations, hostile treatment, miraculous discoveries of drugs. Lives ruined over fabricated charges. This ends now, she said quietly, closing the final file. Whatever it takes, we're going to make this right. The courthouse steps buzzed with activity as reporters gathered for what had become the biggest story in the city. 1 month after her arrest, Sophia climbed those steps flanked by her attorney Diana Palmer and FBI Assistant Director Wilson. Her case against Officer Dawson was finally going to trial. Agent Jenkins, how does it feel to be on this side of the justice system? Shouted a reporter. Diana raised a hand. No comments until after today's proceedings. Inside the courthouse, Sophia paused in the hallway, taking a deep breath. Despite her years of testifying in federal cases, this felt different. This time, she wasn't just an agent doing her job, she was the victim. Nervous? Wilson asked quietly. Not about the trial, Sophia replied. I'm thinking about all the people who went through this without FBI resources, without a top attorney, without anyone believing them. Wilson nodded solemnly. That's why this case matters so much. In courtroom 3, the atmosphere was tense. The prosecution table, where Assistant District Attorney Mark Chen sat reviewing notes, was surrounded by boxes of evidence. At the defense table, Dawson sat with his attorney, a slick-looking man named Reynolds who specialized in defending police officers. Dawson looked different now, cleaned up in a navy suit, his arrogant smirk replaced by a serious expression carefully crafted to convey innocence. When he saw Sophia enter, his eyes narrowed briefly before he composed himself. Judge Sarah Keller entered, and the room rose. At 62, Judge Keller had a reputation for fairness and no tolerance for courtroom theatrics. Be seated, she commanded. We're here for case number 24 CR 7835, the state versus Richard Dawson. Are both sides prepared to begin? Yes, Your Honor, both attorneys responded. Very well. Opening statements. ADA Chen approached the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about abuse of power in its most basic form. Officer Richard Dawson swore an oath to protect and serve all citizens equally. Instead, evidence will show that he systematically targeted minority citizens, fabricated reasons to stop them, planted evidence, and falsified reports, all to boost his arrest numbers and advance his career. Chen gestured toward Sophia. His mistake was targeting FBI agent Sophia Jenkins, who had both the resources and knowledge to fight back. But make no mistake, she represents dozens of victims who weren't so fortunate. When Reynolds rose for the defense, his approach was predictable but effective. Officer Dawson has served this community for 8 years with distinction, he began smoothly. The prosecution would have you believe he's some kind of monster, but the facts will show he's a dedicated officer working in difficult circumstances. Yes, he made a mistake in Agent Jenkins' case, but it was just that, a mistake, not the malicious conspiracy the government is alleging. As the trial got underway, the prosecution called their first witness, the forensic expert who had analyzed the bag of drugs. The only fingerprints on the bag belonged to Officer Dawson, the expert testified. Furthermore, the specific plastic bag matches a batch found in Officer Dawson's patrol car. Reynolds cross-examined aggressively. Isn't it possible Agent Jenkins wore gloves, or used something to handle the bag? Possible but unlikely, the expert replied calmly. There would typically be trace evidence of handling even with gloves. Throughout the morning, the prosecution built their case methodically. The traffic camera footage clearly showed Sophia making a complete stop. The coffee shop video, though grainy, showed Dawson touching his body camera before the search. During a lunch recess, Diana pulled Sophia aside in a private conference room. "Something's happening," she said, checking her phone. 3 officers from Oakwood Heights just arrived at the courthouse with their attorneys. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "The other cleaners?" Diana nodded. "I think they're cutting deals. Reynolds keeps getting texts and looking more worried by the minute." Back in the courtroom, the tension had shifted. Reynolds whispered urgently to Dawson, whose face had lost its composed look, replaced by barely concealed panic. When court resumed, Ade Chen approached the bench. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess. New evidence has come to light that may significantly impact these proceedings." Judge Keller studied him, then glanced at Reynolds, who couldn't meet her eyes. "Very well. Court will recess for 1 hour," she announced. As they filed out, Sophia noticed Officer Briggs sitting in the back of the courtroom with his attorney and 2 FBI agents. The wall of silence was cracking, and Richard Dawson was about to discover just how alone he truly was. When court resumed after the recess, the atmosphere had completely changed. Ada Chen approached the bench with a confident stride, while Reynolds slumped beside a visibly agitated Dawson. "Your Honor," Chen announced, "the prosecution would like to call a new witness, Officer Stanley Briggs of the Oakwood Heights Police Department." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Sophia exchanged glances with Diana. Briggs had been Dawson's closest ally in the cleaners. His testimony could break the case wide open. Judge Keller nodded. "Proceed." Briggs entered looking pale and uncomfortable in his dress uniform. After being sworn in, he avoided looking at Dawson, whose face had turned to stone. "Officer Briggs," Chen began, "how long have you worked with the defendant, Officer Dawson?" 6 years, Briggs replied, his voice barely audible. "During that time, did you observe Officer Dawson engage in any improper or illegal police practices?" Reynolds jumped to his feet. "Objection. This witness wasn't on the original list, and his testimony goes beyond the scope of this specific case." "Your Honor," Chen countered, "Officer Briggs' testimony establishes pattern and intent, which are central to our case." Judge Keller considered briefly. "I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the charges at hand, Counselor." As Briggs testified about the cleaners and their systematic targeting of minority neighborhoods, Dawson's face grew darker. When Briggs described how Dawson kept drugs in his patrol car to plant on suitable suspects, several jurors visibly recoiled. "Did Officer Dawson discuss his arrest of Agent Jenkins with you?" Chen asked. "Yes," Briggs confirmed. "The day after, he was angry when he found out she was FBI. He said he picked her because she was driving a nice car in a white neighborhood and looked like she didn't belong there." The courtroom fell silent at this admission. Chen let the words hang in the air before continuing. Did he admit to planting evidence in her car? Objection. Reynolds shouted. Hearsay. Your Honor, this falls under the statement against interest exception, Chen argued. Overruled, Judge Keller said firmly. The witness will answer. Briggs nodded slowly. Yes, he laughed about it. Said he'd done it dozens of times before, and no one could prove anything because it was his word against theirs. Reynolds' cross-examination was desperate. Aren't you just saying this to save yourself, Officer Briggs? You've made a deal with the prosecution, haven't you? Yes, Briggs admitted. I've agreed to plead guilty to lesser charges, but that doesn't change what happened. After Briggs stepped down, Chen made his final move. The prosecution calls Special Agent Sophia Jenkins. As Sophia took the stand, she felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her case anymore. After establishing her credentials and experience, Chen asked, Agent Jenkins, please tell the court what happened the night Officer Dawson pulled you over. Sophia recounted the events clearly and precisely, her training as an agent evident in her composed delivery. When she described watching Dawson plant the evidence, her voice remained steady, but the injustice of the moment resonated through the courtroom. There's one more piece of evidence I'd like to introduce, Chen said. Your Honor, the FBI had installed a dashboard camera in Agent Jenkins' personal vehicle as part of standard security protocols for field agents. Dawson's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. This footage was recovered after Agent Jenkins' arrest, Chen continued, setting up a video screen. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the high-definition video played, clearly showing Dawson searching the car, reaching into his pocket, and placing the bag of drugs under the seat. When the lights came back up, Dawson's face had drained of all color. His attorney whispered urgently to him, but Dawson seemed beyond hearing. The defense may cross-examine, Judge Keller said. Reynolds stood, defeated. No questions, Your Honor. As Sophia stepped down from the witness stand, her eyes met Dawson's for a brief moment. In that look was the realization of a man who had finally understood the magnitude of his mistake, not just in targeting her, but in all the lives he had damaged through his actions. The truth was now fully exposed, and there would be no escape from justice. The courthouse was packed on the day of the verdict. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury had reached their decision. Sophia sat with Diana and her FBI colleagues, her posture perfect but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. All rise, announced the bailiff as Judge Keller entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. Across the aisle, Dawson stood between his attorneys, his once confident demeanor replaced by resignation. The trial had revealed not just his actions against Sophia, but a 5-year pattern of misconduct that had devastated countless lives. Be seated, Judge Keller instructed. She turned to the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman, a retired school teacher, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the count of evidence tampering, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. On the count of false arrest, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of civil rights violations, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice, how do you find? Guilty. With each pronouncement, Sophia felt a weight lifting, not just for herself, but for every person who had been victimized by Dawson and his colleagues. Judge Keller thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing. As officers approached to take Dawson into custody, his eyes briefly met Sophia's across the room. There was no remorse there, only anger at being caught. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Sophia, Diana, and Assistant Director Wilson emerged into the sunlight. Agent Jenkins, what does this verdict mean to you? Shouted a reporter. For the first time since the ordeal began, Sophia stepped up to the microphones. This case was never just about me, she began, her voice strong and clear. It was about a system that allowed one officer, and others like him, to target citizens based on the color of their skin. It was about the dozens of people who went to jail, lost jobs, lost homes, and lost faith in justice because of fabricated evidence. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. The FBI is working with the district attorney's office to review every arrest made by Officer Dawson and his associates. Already, 27 convictions have been overturned. There will be more. 6 months later, Sophia stood in a community center in the heart of Oakwood Heights. The room was filled with people whose lives had been affected by Dawson and the cleaners. Some had spent months or even years in prison. Others had lost jobs, housing, or custody of their children due to false arrests. Today marks a new beginning, Sophia told them. Not only has Richard Dawson been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, but Chief Grant and 3 other officers have pleaded guilty to related charges. She gestured to a table where several attorneys sat. These lawyers have volunteered to help each of you file for compensation and clear your records. It won't erase what happened, but it's a start. James Washington, the man whose testimony had helped break the case, approached Sophia after the meeting. "I never thought I'd see justice," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "When Dawson planted those drugs on me, I lost everything. My word meant nothing against the police officers." "I understand," Sophia replied softly. "I was fortunate to have resources most people don't. That's why we've created a new FBI task force specifically focused on investigating police misconduct. We want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Later that evening, Sophia returned to her office at the FBI field office. On her desk lay a folder, her new assignment as head of the recently formed Civil Rights Enforcement Team. The team would work directly with communities to identify and investigate patterns of misconduct by law enforcement. As she looked out the window at the city lights, Sophia thought about how a single traffic stop had exposed a web of corruption and changed the course of her career. What had begun as a personal injustice had transformed into a mission that could help rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but as Sophia opened the folder and began reading through her new responsibilities, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope that real change was possible.